After Star Wars, I was on the beach with Steven, and he was talking to me about how he wanted to do a James Bond movie.
George Lucas asked me what I was doing next, and I said I wasn't sure, but I wanted to try again to get Cubby Broccoli to let me direct one of the James Bond films. Cubby, by the way, had twice turned me down.
And, George said, don't waste your time because I've got something better than that. And he said, this is better than Bond. It's called Raiders of the Lost Ark.
So he had the title, he had the character. George had the idea that they were going after an antiquity called the Lost Ark of the Covenant, which I knew a little bit about. I should have known a lot more about it because I'm Jewish and George isn't. But but George knew a lot of the history of when it went missing, and I knew a little bit of what it was about, what the mythology was about it.
The character of Indiana Jones was something that I had worked very hard on, and I didn't want to be safe with him. I didn't want him to be Dudley Do-Right with the perfect teeth, you know, the little twinkle of, you know, cinema magic when he smiles and the sun catches his mouth in a certain way. George and I both wanted Tom Selleck. He actually came in and tested and did a wonderful test. So we went ahead and hired Tom, and then CBS stepped in and said, wait, we have a contract with Tom Selleck to do a movie, a TV series that hasn't aired yet called Magnum P.I., and we're going to exercise that contract. So CBS actually blocked our efforts to put him in our movie, and they gave him Magnum P.I., which was a great thing for Tom. So Tom achieved, and then we were lucky later on down the line with Harrison.
I did the Raiders movie because it was fun to do. And it was also came at a good time because 1941 had just gone down in flames, and I went from the disaster of 1941 to my first day of shooting in La Rochelle, France, on Raiders of the Lost Ark. So in a sense, Raiders sort of rescued me from, you know, getting self-involved with, oh dear, the movie's going to be a big failure and all the critics hate it. And I think by the time I did Raiders of the Lost Ark, my next picture, I was humbled. Every single shot was storyboarded. I was 14 days under schedule. And I basically gave George Lucas a lot of credit because George just said, look, you can go over schedule for Columbia Universal in 1941, but you're my friend. You can't go over schedule with basically what is the money I'm responsible for. That's all he had to say. He wasn't on the set. He wasn't over my shoulder. He came to visit sometimes, but he wasn't haunting me, and he wasn't my on-the-set producer. I didn't see him that often. But when I saw him, he would always nudge me about the schedule and homework and be prepared. And I think Raiders of the Lost Ark was probably the most prepared I've ever been in my career to direct a movie, and it paid off. When I first came up with the idea of E.T., I came up with the actual idea probably when I was a little kid, feeling very lost and alienated, being this Jewish kid in always all Gentile neighborhoods. But then later in life, when my parents were divorced, feeling very much lost and alone. And I remember on the set of Close Encounters when I had Richard Dreyfuss and E.T. returning to the mothership, where it gets swallowed up into the light. And I had this kind of amazing epiphany at that moment while the cameras were rolling. And I thought, I wonder if I should change the ending of this movie. Not another movie, but Close Encounters. What if E.T. is an foreign exchange student? What if that extraterrestrial, who we called Puck, stayed behind with Truffaut, and Dreyfuss goes and they take that E.T. back to Langley or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and start to study him and communicate with him and really try to figure out what their race is like and how we can further our relationship. Wouldn't that be a great movie? Then I said, no, I'll save that for another movie. But I was haunted by this idea of an E.T. that gets trapped on Earth and doesn't go back into the mothership. So in a sense, when I wrote the story of E.T., that was the progression of epiphanies that led up to the actual story of an alien who's lost and alone and 3 million miles from home. He doesn't go AWOL, he's curious. His curiosity gets the better of him. And maybe the other aliens, the botanists, were too busy categorizing and finding plants on Earth to put in their little greenhouse. But E.T. was interested in the big redwood trees, and he was walking away. 600-year-old E.T. is probably the most lost of all the kids I've ever had in a film. But he's no less lost than Elliot, lost in a divorce, no real friends in his life. And that was the bonding of E.T. and Elliot, the alien and the alienated, the two souls, lost souls, who absolutely require each other for a very short amount of time so they can both survive in a spiritual way. I mean, for me, E.T. is the most spiritual movie I've ever made.
Yeah. Raiders, I mean,
That's new, and Poltergeist and E.T. are both films that were shot, both of which shot under $10 million and under schedule.
it's not a race, it's not really a goal, it just happens that when you work on films that don't have mechanical sharks and a lot of major tricks, that you can finish them in a reasonable amount of time.
What can you tell us at this point about E.T., first of all?
Well, that it does not stand for elapsed time. You know, it stands for extraterrestrial, which is, as we all know, a creature from another planet, not from this Earth. And it's a very warm adventure story, and it's a relationship story. Candidly, the unusual aspect of this relationship is it's between a person and a creature, not between two people. But it develops very strongly and very warmly, and I think it's probably one of the most exciting experiences I've had making a movie up until now.
John Williams has made the most remarkable contribution to all of my movies, and they reach the heart universally. In every country, on every continent of the planet, John Williams speaks to people, and John rewrites my movies musically. And I think with E.T., especially at the end, ILM and I can make those bicycles lift off and get off the ground. We can do that. But John Williams is the only one who can make them truly airborne. And I think the last 15 minutes of E.T. is as close to an opera because of John Williams' contributions to that movie than anything I've ever done before in my life.
What about Poltergeist? What can you tell us about that?
Just that it's real scary. It's real scary. And it's the closest thing I think. It's sort of a land Jaws for me. It's a movie about ghosts, but it's not a send-up, it's not a comedy. It's really a movie about a haunting in suburbia. It has a lot of reality, and it has a lot of extraordinary special effects in it. All the effects were done by George Lucas's company, Industrial Light and Magic, up in the Bay Area.
And this stuff all works as long as the audience can find some logic for it. You know, that's why I wanted to do that. Just a little transition from the ghost at the top of the stairs to just for a moment the beast. We shouldn't see his face though. We shouldn't see his face.
I know.
Just the feeling of the body and the arms coming up.
Yeah.
And it's as if he's going to. This thing is growing out of her, and it's getting larger and larger, and the shoulders are almost going up to the ceiling. Just when he begins.
And for me, it was both movies I've sort of been making together, E.T. and Poltergeist, are overlapping in post-production by only 3 weeks. I mean, I was cutting Poltergeist and then cutting E.T. only 3 weeks apart. And the same with the dub. We're beginning to dub Poltergeist. 2 weeks before the dub is complete, E.T. will begin dubbing. So it's almost like making two movies at the same time. I've always had distractions. I work best when I'm distracted, especially by awards. I'm at my best at this time. These two films are fun because I've been able to essentially do two movies in 1 year that are coming out 3 weeks apart. And it's essentially, it's new in the 70s and 80s, but it was nothing new back in the 30s and 40s when a director like Hawks or Curtiz would have between 3 and 4 movies out in 1 calendar year. And that's when the motion picture industry was making, when each studio was making 30, 35 films a year. And there was just a thriving creative force in this community. And I found that was in a way helpful because it gave me great objectivity. When I was working on Poltergeist, I had enormous clarity about E.T., and when I was suddenly involved in E.T., I had enormous clarity about Poltergeist, and I think that it helped both movies.
Right for the first.
Sorry. Go ahead and move around where you were yesterday.
Mr. Bloom, she's old. You're never too old.
A helicopter crash near Magic Mountain today brought tragedy to the set of the Steven Spielberg movie, The Twilight Zone. Actor Vic Morrow and 2 small children were killed when the chopper came down as they were shooting a war scene. Rick DeReyes reports it happened early this morning.
The helicopter crashed just before 2:30 in the Indian Dunes Park as a Warner Brothers crew is about to wrap up filming for a story in the new Twilight Zone movie. The scene called for a nighttime bombing of a Vietnamese village in which actor Vic Morrow was supposed to pick up 2 Vietnamese children and run across the Santa Clara riverbed. Robert Gaynor was operating the camera crane at the time. He saw the chopper come into view.
The cameras rolled and the helicopter was hovering and was supposed to destroy the village. And Vic Morrow was supposed to run across the river with the 2 children to save them. And as the helicopter went out of control, he was running across the river, and the helicopter spun down into the river and met Vic Morrow apparently and the 2 children at the water level.
The crash tore the rotor blade from the chopper, killing Morrow, 6-year-old Renee Shin Chen of Pasadena, and 7-year-old Mai Ka Din Lee of Cerritos. There were 6 persons in the helicopter when it crashed, including director John Landis of Animal House fame. They were all taken to nearby Henry Mayo Newhall Memorial Hospital. Only 4 persons needed treatment. All were later released.
And so, I mean, the hazards making movies are surrounded. There's something that happens when you're making a film, especially with directors and cameramen, and that is when your eye is through the camera, you are taken away to a Never Never Land, a kind of reality Oz. And you suddenly, with the eye glued to the camera, nothing can happen to you. You could be on the edge of a train, looking through a viewfinder, heading towards a tunnel with no clearance, and as far as you're concerned, it's only a movie until everything goes black and then white.
It looks like a movie in there.
Yeah, and I think it's almost the sirens that are calling you, and it's a danger. You have to always be aware that once your eye's in the camera, there are dangers all around.